Hi everyone, I am Shopnajit Das. The topic I have decided for today's discussion, as you can see, is structuralism. Structuralism, as you might be knowing, is a very important part of literary theory. It emerged in the 1920s and it inspired so many different movements. It inspired post-structuralism, it inspired feminism, it inspired media theories, it inspired psychoanalysis, it inspired film studies. So you can see the importance of this movement of the theories of structuralism. So we have to understand structuralism from various angles. This very idea of structuralism was propounded by the French linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, and it revolutionized the Western thoughts. So, without further ado, let's get into the world of structures. Let's begin. Okay, so first we need to understand what a structure is. Does everything have a structure? Does everything from the smallest unit to the largest entity have a structure? So this is my question. If you look at these two images, you'll find that the solar system, the large big solar system has a structure, and a small cell, it also has a structure. So you can see in the case of the solar system, the sun is at the center and all the other planets are revolving around it, right? And in the case of the cell system, you find that nucleus is at the center and all the other elements are surrounding it. Okay, so this is the very structure of the solar system and the cell solar system, the large, the big solar system, and the small, very tiny cell. It also has a structure. That means everything has to have a structure in order to exist. So, however, one thing is to be noted here is that this can be said that every structure uh, exists in its relation to other structures. For example, in the entire universe, our solar system is not the only galaxy. There are countless number of galaxies in the universe, right? And our solar system is just a tiny part of the entire galaxy. In order to understand in order to understand our solar system, it has to be it has to be compared with the other galaxies. It has to be compared, it has to be understood in its relation to the entire universe. Then we'd be able to get a holistic understanding of our solar system. Similarly, in the case of the cell, you find that cell is part of tissue, and tissue is part of muscles, and muscles are part of the body. So in this way you find that there are smaller structures within larger structures. So smaller structures can be located within a larger structure. So we cannot basically say, we cannot understand things separately, because there is a larger structure, okay, of which the smaller structure are part. Okay, so this is a very basic understanding of structure. That means everything, in order to exist, has to have a structure. So this is the very fundamental understanding of us, what a structure is. You can take any example, you can take anything, and find that it has a structure. Okay, without structure it cannot exist. So structure is very, very important for any entity to exist, right? So this is the understanding of structure. Let's go to the next slide to understand uh, what comes. Here you say, let's see that, can we apply the thing that we have just discussed to the language, can we do that? Let's see. Language is the whole, is the large system, is the big structure, and within which we find there are smaller structures. Okay, so let's take the example a letter. Letter, say, is the smallest structure of the big large structure language. Okay, now later then comes, let's say, later is the smaller structure within the bigger structure, that is word. Okay, so word is the bigger structure in which falls the smaller structure, letters. Okay, so now the words is the smaller structure within the larger structure, sentences. Sentences are smaller structures within the larger structures called paragraphs. Paragraphs are, smaller structures within the larger structures called narratives. And, so in this way, we find that, there are smaller structures within larger structures. So this is what structuralism does. Structuralism tries to locate the smaller structures within the larger structures, or we can say it tries to it tries to go beyond the smaller structure and locate the larger structures. Okay, so this is what structuralism does. However, let's see what comes next. Here you see, one thing is important. Before going into the theories of structuralism, we need to understand new criticism. What is it? Let's see. New criticism, you might be now wondering, what is new criticism? What is then old criticism? Actually, there is nothing, you cannot say something that's it's old criticism. It is traditional criticism. What is this traditional criticism? You might be knowing the names of traditional critics for, say, Matthew Arnold, Philip Sidney, also P.B. Shelley, and of course or Dr. Johnson. They can be called traditional critics. What they did, they basically focused on the general understanding of literature. They wanted to know the purpose of literature in general. So instead of focusing a particular work, they would focus on the entire corpus of literature, the entire corpus of, let's say, of the present, of the contemporary literature or the ancient literature. So they would focus, and also the comparison between the ancient literature and, let's say, the contemporary literature. So it was their, uh, you know, their, I would say, their motive. Okay, but we can say that, for example, John Dryden, there's John Dryden, he actually engaged in analyzing a particular text. You might be knowing it is Ben Jonson's epicene, Silent Woman. So you find that there are instances of the critics who focused on particular works, but it was not a common practice. Okay, so but what new critics did, new critics, propounded the idea that in order to understand a particular text, you need to focus on the text itself. You do not need to go for the context of the text. Okay, for example, they say that you do not need to know the biography of the author. You do not need to know who is the writer of the text. You do not even need to know the name of the writer. You do not need to know in which period the text was written. You do not need to have any kind of contextual references in order to understand the text. All you need to do is to focus on the words on the pages. Okay, and by reading and by interacting with the words, meaning can be generated. So you do not have to rely on the other sources. Okay, so this is their idea. New critics, they propounded this idea. Okay, and you can see that I have mentioned a few names of the new critics. For example, there is Cleon Brooks, Robert Penn Warren, William Wimsatt, Monroe Beardsley, R.P. Blackmore, John Crowley Ransom. John Crowley Ransom, you need to know that he was the one who coined the term new criticism. Okay, in 1940s, I think, yeah. And F.R. Lewis. Okay, so they were the new critics. Their approaches were distinct. However, we find some similar, some predominant features in their approaches. So you can see that first, what would they do? they would lay emphasis on the language and formal properties of texts. What does it mean? It means that they would look at the linguistic or aspects of the text. They would look at the formal aspects of the text. This means they would they would reading the text closely. Okay, they would find out all the kinds of literary devices used in particular text. They would try to understand the narrative technique. They would try to understand the character. They would analyze the character. So all would they would do, would be limited to the text itself. They would not focus the text relationship with other texts. Okay, so this is what is going to be criticized by post-structuralist uh, critics. For example, Roland Barthes, he would say that a text is a tissue of quotations drawn from different sources of culture. That means within a text you have intertextuality. A text is made up of sources from other texts. Okay, this is something that would be discussed by post structuralists. Okay, however, you need to know that, and also they say that texts are autotelic. That means meaning is contained within the text. Okay, so you don't have to rely on other resources. You just need to read the text, and it interacting with the text would be able to generate meaning. Okay, that's why they said texts are autotelic. Now, as I have told you already, that and now the important part is that their approach can be you know labeled as centripetal. What does it mean? Centripetal means you are moving to the center. Okay, so what they would do, they would go to the heart of the text. They would go to the they would go to the center of the text, okay, and analyze its different parts, but they would not go outside the text. That means they would not, their approach would not be centrifugal, means going beyond the text. Their approach is limited within the text. So this is the very understanding of new criticism. However, you need to know that new criticism's approach is different from structuralism, because structuralism, in the beginning I told you that structuralism or tries to understand the relation of the smaller structures with the bigger structures. Okay, how can we locate the smaller structures within the bigger structures, or else how can we find the bigger structures by looking at the smaller structures? So their approach is something, is opposite, can be said opposite uh, to the new critics approach, right? Structuralists differ from new critics in this respect. So it is important to know new criticism as well, because that structuralism would deviate from new criticism, and that is why it is important to know new criticism. Okay, the difference between new criticism and structuralism, I am going to discuss structuralism in detail, and you would be able to understand its how it is different from new criticism in a better manner. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Yeah, here I want to ask you some, I want to raise some basic questions. What is the relationship between representation and reality? What is the relationship of language and what is the relationship between language and the reality? So these are certain questions that can be asked. Okay, so how we can perceive reality? Reality, can we through language can we perceive reality? Does reality exist beyond beyond the world of language, or is it language that actually shapes our reality? These are certain questions that structuralism asks. Okay, it tries to establish the relationship between representation and reality. It tries to establish the relationship between literary world, or I should say that the world of words and the physical world, the material world. Okay, how our perception of the material world is shaped by language. So these are certain questions that structuralism asks. Now the important thing is that you need to know that they say no meaning can be generated in isolation. Okay, I am going to talk about Saussure a bit later, but before going to discuss him, we need to have some basic basic understandings of structuralism. So it propounds the idea that no meaning can be generated in isolation, right? It can, is it logical? Let's take the example. For example, if I say a foreign word, okay, let's take the example of, let's say, buenos dias. Okay, buenos dias in Spanish means good morning. But let's say someone who doesn't know Spanish and he is or he or she is looking at the word buenos dias, and what meaning can be generated out of this single word, where you cannot relate its relation, or you cannot relate this word with other words. Now let's say I utter a word, let's say it's light. Okay, light, immediately you know that what is light, because it is light, because it is not other things. It is not darkness, so it is not grimness, so it is light because it is not all other things. Let me simplify it. Let's say take the example of a cat. Okay, cat is a cat because it is not all other animals. So what you are doing, you are uh, you know you are focusing on the relationship of the cat with other animals, and you are differing cat, you are actually differentiating between cat and all the other species of animals, and you are generating meaning out of it. Okay, so this is the very basic understanding of structuralism, which I am going to discuss in a bit later when we'll be discussing Saussure. Now, another important thing is that there are smaller structures within larger structures. As I have discussed that a cell is smaller structure within the larger structure called tissue. Tissue is the smaller structure within the larger structure called muscle. Muscle is the smaller structure within the larger structure called body. So in this way, we find that there are smaller structures within larger structures, right? Another important thing they say, it says that to generate meaning, one structure needs to be understood in relation to other structures. In order to understand the functioning of a cell, you need to understand the functioning of a tissue. And in order to understand the functioning of a tissue, you need to understand the functioning of muscles. So in this way, you find that the smaller structure has to be understood by its relation with its by its relation to the larger structure. Okay, and their approach, I told you that new criticism's approach was centripetal, while structuralism's approach, it can be called centrifugal. It tries to go beyond the smaller structure. It tries to locate the smaller structure within the bigger structure, right? So I have decided, and now when we apply this theory to literature, how we can understand, how we can locate literature, how we can locate literature within the larger structure called the knowledge system. Let's see. Let's take the example of a particular poem. It can be any poem. Okay. Let's say it's a romantic poem. Now, this poem is the smaller structure within the larger structure called poetry. Okay. It belongs to the larger structure called poetry. Okay, and within poetry, as you know, it is a romantic poetry, and within the poetry structure, bigger structure, there are other smaller structures. It is romantic poetry, it is one smaller structure, and there can be other poem kinds of poetry. For example, there can be elegy, there can be modern poetry, there can be, metaphysical poetry. So this romantic poetry, within the larger structure called poetry, and within the larger structure called poetry, there are other smaller structures like metaphysical poetry, like Elizabethan poetry or sonnets. There is, let's say, modern poetry, and also the romantic poetry. So you can see the single poem belong, let's say, romantic poetry, belonging to the larger structure called poetry. Now poetry is the smaller structure within the larger structure called literature. Why? Because literature has many genres, right? For example, when you look at poetry within the larger structure called literature, in the larger structure called literature, there are other, forms of, other forms. For example, there is structure of, let's say, novel. There is the structure of uh, essays, there is structure of drama or plays. So within the structure, the big structure, the larger structure called literature, there are smaller structures like poetry, like drama, like novels, like, you know play essays. So this is how we can locate, poetry within the larger corpus called literature. Now coming to the next part, that uh, literature now belongs to humanities. So the smaller structure literature, you know can be located within the very vast bigger structure called humanities. And in humanities there are other smaller structures. There is history, there is political science, there is, other languages, there is, geography. So you find that, within the larger structure called humanities, there are smaller structures like literature, like history, like geography, like economics. Okay, and now this humanity structure can also be located. Where it can be located? It can be located within the vast, very, larger structure called the knowledge system. Okay, the knowledge system, is the, large structure which encompasses all sorts of, knowledge systems. So this is the larger structure. So humanities can be located within the knowledge system. Okay, so this is how we can, locate a small unit within the very vast, structure. So this is what structuralism does. It tries to locate a small unit within the very vast structure. Okay, all right, so this is the understanding of basic understanding of structuralism. Now coming to the next slide, let's discuss Saussure. Let me tell you about Saussure. Ferdinand de Saussure was a French linguist, and he gave lectures at Geneva University uh, from 1907 to 1911. And later on his lectures were published as a course in general linguistics. So you can see his lectures were, the students. So the book called A Course in General Linguistics, was made out of the notes his students took. Okay, so he did not publish it. His students took the notes and they were compiled together and published as A Course in General Linguistics in 1916. So now coming to Saussure's ideas, how Saussure was different from other linguists. There was linguistics in France, in Europe, right? There was morphology, there was phonology. So how did Saussure differ from them? This is important. Saussure said that, you know, general linguistics, other linguistics, what they did, they focus on the evolution of words. They focused on the diachronic approach. That means diachronic means, different points of time. Okay, how a word evolved through different, over years. For example, let me give you the example. Let's say the word queer. You know, the word queer in the 20th, in the early 20th century had a different meaning. The meaning that we have today. The word queer, meant something that was very much, I would say, unnatural. Okay, for example, Robert Frost's poem called Stopping by Woods. In this poem you have that reference to queer, where he says that my horse might think it queer. Okay, so this queer and today's queer, the word, they have very different meaning. So today the word queer has a very different meaning. The the word has evolved. Okay, so this is Saussure's interest. He does not want to understand the etymological and ontological uh, structures of words. Okay, what he wants to do, he wants to study, he wants to understand how meaning is generated, how he understands how language functions, how language shapes our reality, what is the difference between representation and reality. Okay, so his approach is much more, I would say, philosophical. His approach is much more, I would say, is revolutionary in this respect, because he is trying to establish the connection between uh, reality and representation, focusing on language, how language shapes your reality. Okay, language is not something that we speak. Language is something, definitely we speak something, but language that allows us to speak. Okay, it is not that we control language, it is language that controls us. This is basically the very understanding of structuralism. He is locating the human beings within the linguistic system. Okay, so his approach can also be called anti-humanistic. Why? Because we know that western ideals were very much anthropocentric. That means they were the ideals were always related to the autonomy of human beings. Okay, as if human beings can are autonomous beings, and they have the free will to do whatever they want to do. Okay, but in the case we know that in many cases we know that human beings are social animals, and human beings are shaped by the society they live in. Okay, so this is basically very very philosophical in nature. Okay, however, I'm going to discuss his approach. So he was interested, Saussure was interested in synchronic study of language. That means he wants to understand how meaning is generated, how language functions in a particular point of time, in a particular age. Okay, the present age, the contemporary time. So he focuses on the function of language in the contemporary time. Okay, so this is synchronic approach. This is very different from diachronic approach. Okay, now coming to his next idea, this is of long and parole. Very important. Long and parole is something that he focuses on these two aspects, and this is the very very foundational understanding of structuralism. Long, Saussure says, is the system, is the is the set of rules. Okay, set of rules. We can also, in other words, you can say long is comparable to grammar, system of rules, and parole is comparable to to individual sentences, okay, which are made by following the law or following the rules, following the set of rules. Okay, let's understand it in a simpler terms. Let's say, you know let's say in chess we have rules, right? We have a set of rules, you know and by uh, following this set of rules we can uh, make endless number of moves, right? So similarly, following the grammar, we can make endless number of sentences. That's why, parole is the individual, can be said, is the part of long parole. Okay, and on the important thing is that long is something that is unachievable. Long is always evolving with the addition of new paroles. Okay, so long is the very abstract idea. On the other hand, parole is the manifestation of the long. Okay, so this is what we can understand by looking at Saussure's concept of long and parole. Okay, and Saussure was focused on long, not parole. He wanted to, he wanted to study the lung, how lung functions, the big, structure of language shapes individuals, individuals utterances. Okay, so this is Saussure's interest. He wants to look at the functioning of lung in shaping paroles, in shaping individual utterances, individual interactions, individual, what the individual says, how in the individual says. So this is, Saussure's understanding of lung and parole. Now, he also gives another important concept, that is of syntagmatic and paradigmatic. Now, while discussing this, we have to know, why do we choose a certain number of words, over other words. For example, let's say I live, I live in a house, okay, and I could easily say the word I reside in a house. I so why do I use I live instead of I reside? This is what syntagmatic and paradigmatic study, approach does. It tries to understand, why do we choose certain words instead of others, and also why do we follow a particular sequence, while there are other forms of sequences. For example, let me give an example. From this example, let's say I live in a house, okay. uh, Following syntagmatic, approach, we can say that I can, you know modify the sentence. Okay, instead of saying I live in a house, I can say in house I live. Okay, in house I live, or also I can say house in I live. So why I am using this particular, uh, you know sequence? Okay, I live in a house, but it was basically conventional, or also following the rules of grammars. So rules of grammar, that subject object verb, so this is also something that is related to syntagmatic. This means why you are choosing a certain sequence over the possibility that there are other sequences, in the context of the possibility that there can be other forms of sequence. Okay, so this is syntagmatic, and as you can see, this approach is horizontal. Okay, is this approach is horizontal. And on the other hand, we have paradigmatic approach. Paradigmatic approach is a bit different, is a bit difficult as well. Why is it so? Paradigmatic approach tries to understand the choice of words. Why do we choose certain words instead of other words? Okay, while syntagmatic approach tries to understand, why we choose a certain sequence over, in the context that there can be other sequences of words. Paradigmatic approach tries to understand, why do we choose certain words where there are other synonymous words. Okay, So for example, just take the example, uh, um, let's say I live in the house. The same example, I live in a house. I let's say I could use other words, related words. I could use I live in a bungalow, or I can say I live in a cottage, I live in a hut, I live in a palace, I live in a castle. They are similar words, but however there is the difference is that difference lies in their structure, lies in their magnitude, lies in their size, but they are similar words. Okay, they are the places where people reside. Okay, so I am choosing a particular word over other words. Take the example of I live in a house instead of saying I live in a bungalow. Okay, so these two words can be used synonymously, but why I am choosing one word instead of other? So this is what paradigmatic study focuses on. Okay, so in this way you find that these two approaches try to give a holistic understanding of the choice, of how sentences are formulated. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Here we find this is very very important. So sure, you know gives this concept that instead of looking at the uniqueness of the word, we try to uh, instead of trying to find the meaning of a word by looking at its distinction, we try to focus on the word, we try to generate meaning by its difference from other words. So as I told you in the beginning that you know that structuralism tries to locate you know tries to understand the relationship of one structure with other structures. Okay, so in this regard we find that Saussure is saying that the meaning of a word depends on the meaning of other words. I gave you the example that uh, I mean word, foreign word you do not know the meaning of. If you see the word, you won't be able to generate meaning out of it because you are being unable to relate it with other words that are known to you. Okay, so Saussure says that instead of looking at the uniqueness of the words, we look at their difference from other words. That means, you know, you know, uh, we find that means the words can are located within a within an associational clusters, within associational clusters. That means one word always the meaning of one word depends on the meaning of other words. Now how can we understand the meaning of a word? Depends on the meaning, depends on depends on its difference from the meaning of other words. Okay, so this is the system, this is binary. This leads basically to the system of binarization. We think in binaries. This is social propounds. Okay, this is what social propounds. Okay, this is very unique, right? Instead of looking at a particular thing, looking at the uniqueness of this particular object, you are looking at its difference from other objects. Okay, let me give an example. Let's say let's take the example of a cat. A cat is a cat because it is not a bat. A cat is a cat because it is not a hat. A cat is a cat because it is not a, let's say, rat. So the meaning of cat depends on the meaning of other words. That it's different from the meaning of other words. So cat, in an cat is can cat always has to be differed from the other animals. A cat is a cat because it is not all the other animals. Okay, not all the other things. So this is what Saussure says. Okay, so and this basically leads to the system of binarization. He says that we think in binaries. instead of looking at the positive instead of making meaning positively, we make meanings negatively. That means when you talk of light, we always, we always basically generate meaning of light by looking at the like looking at how it is different from, its opposite, that is darkness. Here we find that there is light, there is darkness, there is male, there is female, there is strong, there is weak, there is speech, and there is writing. Okay, so here we find that the meaning of light depends on its difference from darkness. And also we can see that here it is very important that on the words in the words on the left side are basically, considered, are privileged, are more privileged than the word on the right side. Okay, so in this system of binarization, one word is given more important than the other words, or we can say one word is given more important than its opposite. Okay, for example, uh, here I am going to talk about just speech and writing, because if we talk about other examples, let's say the example of male and female, feminists basically argue that female is defined by what she is not. Okay, I mean, how she is different from male. Okay, a woman is defined by what she is not rather than what she is. So this is, we find that, there are many criticisms regarding structuralism. So I am going to focus here on only speech and writing. Speech and writing, Saussure says that, speech is superior to writing. He says because in speech there is the presence of a speaker, there is a speaker. Okay, and in the case of writing, there is not, there is no speaker, the speaker is absent. That's why we find that, Saussure is privileging speech, over writing, because speech is the, a speech ensures the presence of the speaker, while writing, does not have the presence of the speaker. This is what is criticized by Jacques Derrida. He is a deconstructionist thinker. He says that Saussure's idea has to be challenged. And, he says that, Saussure's acknowledgement of speech as superior to writing is flawed. It actually, it promotes what he calls uh, logocentrism. Okay, also he calls metaphysics of absence. So what he suggests is that, Derrida suggests that we have to go beyond this process of binarization, because in this process of binarization, one thing is given more importance than the other. One thing is given more important, is given much privilege. On the other hand, the other word, is given one other thing is not is ignored. Okay, so this is what Derrida says, and he calls it, he actually invents a kind of a, he gives the concept of a unique sort of, writing, or unique sort of, what can I say, unique sort of meaning making, and that is called, he calls archie writing. Archie writing is beyond speech and beyond writing. Okay, so this is something that Derrida uh, you know uh, talks about. Okay, so beyond speech and beyond writing, that means he is breaking the, or I should say, he is deconstructing the binary system of meaning making. Okay, so this is something that is related to post structuralism, which can be discussed while discussing post structuralism. Now let's go to the next slide. So here we actually go on to understand Saussure's basic understanding. Okay, let's see. He says, this is basically his uh, understanding of representation and reality. The representation and reality. Let's come to the point. As you can see, Shakespeare in Romeo and Juliet, says, it's a quote from Romeo and Juliet. You can see, what's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name would smell as sweet. Very practical. It is we who give meaning on meaning to objects, meaning to entities, right? So a rose is will remain a rose even if we call it a lily. The rose will smell as rose if we call it a jasmine. The rose would, would the color of rose would remain red even we call it, let's say, lotus. Okay, so this is rose will remain rose even we call it by any other name. Okay, this is very logical. So this is what we can understand, that the meaning is basically imposed on an object or an entity. It doesn't have an inherent meaning. Okay, let's see Saussure's view on language and reality. The relation between words and objects is arbitrary. That means the very naming system is arbitrary. The objects, the entities, they do not have names. Okay, we actually give names to them. That's why, and this name is established through, the practice of calling something is established through the repetitive use. Okay, I'm going to talk about it. Let's see. Words and their meanings are not natural. It is not natural. Okay, it is not natural. A rose would remain a rose even it is not called by us a rose, by something else. Okay, but created through the repeated repetitive use collectively. It is very important, because as we have been calling a rose, okay, so it has been accepted that this red color flower can be called rose. For another example, let's say, we call a four-wheeled vehicle a car. Okay, because we call this a four-wheeled vehicle a car because we have been calling this vehicle as car for a long time. You need to remember that this is decided not by an individual. Okay, until and unless it is an authoritarian state. This is basically, this practice of naming is, dependent on the collective, it depends, it is dependent on the community. Okay, let's say the example, let's say we know that in the traffic signal there is, there are three lights: red light, green light, and we have yellow light. Okay, red light means stop, yellow light means wait, and green light means go. Okay, now let's say someone wants to change the meaning. Let's say red light means go, yellow light means, let's say, stop, and green light means uh, stop. Okay, so if someone thinks this way, it would not be possible, because this has become a conventional. So it is important to note that, we do not shape language, but language actually shapes us, because this conventionality of the language shapes us. So when you speak language, okay, we basically cannot say it is my language, because language is not yours. Language belongs to the public domain. It doesn't have its existence in the private domain, in the on the individual level. Language does not exist. Language exists on the public domain. This is very important, right? This is what Saussure says. This is what, this is what can be argued, that language shapes our reality. Okay, it is not we shape language, but it is language that shapes us, that shapes our perception, that shapes our conception, that shapes our understanding of the world. Okay, Now let's take the example a cat. Take the example of a cat. A cat, cat, written on a on a page. Okay, written on a page, or it can be a sound, and the actual cat. Is there any connection between these two? Between these two entities? No, words do not have any inherent connection with the animal, with the entity, with the object they suggest. No, they refer to. They have no connection between them. Okay, so this cat and the animal cat, they are very different. There is no connection, inherent connection. But as we have been calling this small animal cat for a long time, and now it has been established that this small four-legged animal can be called cat. So this is something that is so this suggests that uh, this is what suggests the conventionality of language. Okay, language is something that is uh, created out of the repetitive use. Okay, so meaning is created out of the repetitive use. Meanings of objects depend on the repetitive use. Okay, an individual, not by the individual will, it can be they can be determined. Okay, so this is the understanding of uh Saussure's uh you know language and reality, Saussure's view on language and reality. Let's go to the next slide. This is very important. This is a painting by René Magritte. René Magritte was a French painter, and he painted this uh, portrait where we find that this is the image of a pipe, and in the below we find that it is written, this is not a pipe. So this is important. This is funny, right? At the same time, it is very important because he is suggesting the non-referentiality of of signifiers. I am going to talk about signifiers in a bit later, but the very notion that that words are, and there is no inherent connection between the words and the reality or the real objects. For example, this is not a pipe. Is this a pipe? No, this is not a pipe. This is the painting of a pipe. Okay, so this is important to know that there is no inherent, this painting suggests, though in a very funny manner, suggests that there is no inherent connection between the sign and the signs and the things they refer to. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. This is the, I would say, very important part of Saussure's linguistics. Now, where he gives the concept of sign. Sign is a coin of, two-sided coin, and it consists of signifier and signified, and the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. Now take the example, signifier can be words, signifier can be sounds. Okay, as I have told you, the sound cat, and the signified is the concept. Okay, concept, or it is the object. Let's say the signifier is cat. Okay, the word cat, and the signified is the four-legged animal cat, real cat, actual cat, and the relationship between them is absolutely arbitrary. That means it is conventionally established. Okay, so signifier and signified you know do not have a an inherent inherent relationship. Their relationship is arbitrary. And now the important thing is that different signifiers, different words can lead to the same signified, and at other times the same signifier can lead to different signifieds. This is important. This is also a bit confusing. That means there is the relationship between signifier and signified is not static. The relationship between them is rather dynamic. Let's see how we can understand, or also can say that the relationship depends on the context. Let's see how we can understand. Let's take the example. Let's look at the examples. Let's go. See the first example. There is the image of a tree, and it is the signified. Okay, and on the left hand we have the word tree, that is signifier 1. Dutch in Bengali, it is signifier 2. And pair in Hindi, this is signifier 3. And all of them, are leading to the idea of tree, or the same, the different signifiers are leading to the same signifier, that is the tree. It can be case number 1. Now let's go to the case number 2. Here we find I have taken these two scenes from the movie PK, and here we find that in the first case, PK, feels that this woman uh, uh, is feeling sad. That's why he tries to hold her hand, and everyone in the bus says that, विधवा को देख के try कर रहे हो क्या? So and then PK asks, how do you know she's a widow? And people say, can't you see that she's wearing a white sari, a white dress? Okay, so in the Hindu context, a woman wearing a white dress symbolizes her widowhood. Okay, so you can see it is signifier 1, that is white dress. Now coming to the signifier 2, this is also white dress, and you can see now PK goes to another lady, and he asked, "आपका पति मर गया क्या?" So the woman asks, "Why?" Then PK says, "Why are you asking?" The woman says, PK says, "You are wearing white." The woman says, "So what?" PK says that you are wearing white because your husband is dead. Women wear white dress when their husband is dead. So, and the woman says that no, we wear black dress when someone is dead. So PK gets confused, and later what does it suggest? This woman is a Christian woman. In the white dress, now becomes the signified white dress now refers to the signified that the woman is about to be married. The same white dress in the Hindu community refers to a woman wearing a white dress, white shari, refers to the widow, who refers to her widowhood. On the other hand, the white dress, a woman white dress, in the Christian wearing white dress in the Christian community refers that the woman might be getting married. Okay, so the see that the same signifier leading to different signifiers in different contexts. So that's why it's very important. Okay, the relationship between the signifier and the signified, is very much dependent on the context. Okay, let's go to the next slide. It is basically C.S. Peirce semiotics. Okay, semiotics is the study of science. You need to remember that there is a difference. Saussure basically focused on the functioning of language, and C.S. Peirce or language sound. Okay, or I mean image sound. While C.S. Peirce focuses on the visual images and their relation with the objects. He gives the concept of three important signifiers. First we have iconic. Iconic signifier, as you can see, painting of a house, this is the signifier for the house signified. That means there is a resemblance between the signifier and the signified. The painting of a house resembles the actual painting. Okay, next see, it is indexical. The indexical, in the case of indexical, we find that smoke a signifier for fire, and here we find that there is actually a connection between these two objects or two events, right? Or two objects. Smoke, you know, there would be a smoke if there is a fire. That means they are interrelated. Okay. And coming to the next uh, idea, next section, that is symbolic. Okay, this is very important. There is no connection, there is no resemblance between the signifier and the signified. For example, red light for stop. As we know that there is no, you know, uh, inherent meaning between inherent the relationship between them is absolutely arbitrary, as is also argued by Saussure. Red light may mean go, but as it has been conventionally used, that's why it now symbolizes stop. Okay, in other context it may also mean something else. For example, in the operation theater, the outside the operation theater, there is red light. This means operation is going on. So the same signifier in different contexts may lead to different signifieds. So it's something that you need to know about C.S. Pierce and his this basically, his concepts are very much important while discussing visual representation. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And as I told you, structuralism inspired so many other movements, right? The immediate movement that was inspired by structuralism was Russian formalism. As you can see, the name formalism, that means, forms, related to forms, and structures, they are interrelated. And here we find that there are important formalists, Russian formalists: Viktor Slavsky, Roman Jakobson, Boris Ishenbaum, Yuri Tinyanov, Vladimir Prop. What they did, they tried to understand the forms of different genres. They tried to focus on the common patterns. Okay, now you might be confused. They tried to focus on different texts. Okay, they also focused on try to understand the relationship between different texts. Focusing on focusing on their forms. The difference between Russian formalism and new criticism is that while new criticism, focused only one text, okay, only the text, Russian formalists, they focused on the forms definitely, but focusing on the forms, they tried to establish a common pattern among all other texts. So this is important. Okay, this is where for Russian formalism differs from new criticism. New criticism and Russian formalism, both, they try to understand the formal structures of the texts. But the thing is that new critics did not want to find other text relation to that particular text, while Russian formalists, they tried to find common patterns, common structures in different texts. Okay, they would also focus on the formal structures, and new critics also would look at the formal structures. But while new critics would look at the formal structures of a particular text, Russian formalists would look at the uh, structures of the text and would try to establish common patterns that exist among them. Okay, let's go to the next slide. There are many, as you can see, there are many Russian formalists, but I have decided to talk about only two. That is Viktor Slavsky and Vladimir Prop. Viktor Slavsky gave the idea of fabula and soze. And fabula and soze, they are Russian words. Fabula means the raw materials, the story, and sourced means plot. Okay, so this means that, in order to let me give you an example. Let's say the raw materials are already existing, and in order to make them story, you need to have a plot. So when these raw materials are arranged in a particular manner or arranged in a particular sequence, then it can become this these raw materials can be turned into, can be transformed into a story. Okay, so this is what Victor Slavsky says about fabula and Saint. Let me give an example. For example, as you know, Shakespeare took his inspiration from the Holinshed Chronicles for writing Macbeth. Okay, now what he did, he just did not write down everything from the book. Okay, he got inspired from this book. He took the raw material from the Holinshed Chronicle and he gave it a shape. He arranged the raw materials in a sequential manner, sequential manner, so that they can be transformed into a story, into a story. So this is what Shakespeare did. He just did not took just did not take the materials and write them down. No, he took the raw materials and arranged them so that a story could be emerged out of that raw materials. So you can also find this is also a kind of related to structure. Coming to another very famous Russian formalist, that is who is Vladimir Prop. He wrote a remarkable work called Morphology of Folktale in 19 it was published in 1928. And here we find, he looked at Russian folktales and found similar patterns. He found that there are similar patterns existing almost in every folk tale. Okay, he says that there are common characters: hero, false hero, villain, donor, helper, princess, princess's father, dispatcher. So these are the common characters found almost in all Russian folk tales. Okay, and you can also find that this is very similar to Bollywood films. Bollywood romantic films, you will find that there is a hero, then there is a villain, there is a heroine's father. Okay, so this is this very structure of given by uh, Vladimir Prop about the folktale. A Russian folktale can be applicable to Bollywood romantic films. And he says that there can there are 31 functions which can be found in every folktale. Okay, that means he gives the patterns. Okay, he gives the patterns that, let's say, in a folktale there would be, let's say, not all of them, let's say only 20 functions are found. Let's say in another folktale there are 15 functions which can be found. Okay, but the important thing is that apart from these 31 functions, there can be no other functions which can be found in Russian folktale. So he looked, he read the studied Russian folktales and came to the conclusion that they have these functions. Okay, almost apart from these 31 functions, no other function can be found in any Russian folktale. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Here I have tried to understand, or I tried to give the structure of Feluda stories following Vladimir Prop's morphology of folktale, where he gave the concept of similar patterns in Russian folktale. You know, Feluda, as you know, as you might be knowing, is a very famous sleuth created by, detective created by Satyajit Ray. And in almost all Feluda stories, there is this similar pattern. Okay, there are these similar patterns. Okay, first a client would approach Feluda along with Topshe, his nephew, and Jatayu, the famous writer, his friend, would travel to the location of the crime, mostly outside Calcutta, outside Kolkata. Okay, he would start his investigation. Okay, he would basically be investigating the people he thinks they might be involved in the crime. He would face challenges. Okay, the most significant challenges you know he faced he faces when he meets Mogunlal Megraj, okay, the merchant, kind of the villainous figure in the stories. And then what we do, he would put the pieces of the puzzle together, okay, in order to solve the mystery behind the crime. And ultimately, what he would do, he would catch the criminal. And later on, he would give the explanation of how he solved the mystery. Okay, so this is, I mean, similar. These patterns can be found almost in all Feluda stories. Okay, for example, in the end of the Joy Baba Felunath, Feluda gives his explanation how he got to know that the Ganesha idol in the in the mouth of the mouth of the lion, okay, in the mouth of the Murti lion was false because the owner kept it in the bank. The real one was kept in the bank. So this is how we find the similar pattern in detective stories. In other detective stories can be these similar patterns can be found. For example, in Sherlock Holmes, you'll also find that Sherlock is approached by a client, then he and Watson would go on to solve the mystery, and at the end they will solve the mystery. So these are the common patterns found in almost all detective stories. Let's go to the next slide. This is very important. Rollerbird is is the one who can be considered as the figure who uh, created a bridge between structuralism and post-structuralism. His writings, there are so many writings that focus on structuralism, but here I have only decided to talk about, his uh, Saza. This is A/Z. It is also known as Saza. Saza. So let's see what he discusses in Saza. First, in Sauzon, তারপরে he discusses Balzac, the very famous French author's Saracen is a story by him, and finds 561 lexions. Lexions means units of meaning. Okay, so and gives the idea of 5 chords. So you can see what is very similar among all the theories is that all of them try to find a pattern, find a system, find a structure. I mean, find structures. So common structures. Okay, so this is what structuralism does. Structuralism tries to understand the Structuralism tries to understand common patterns and tries to locate them within the bigger structure. Okay, so here we find Rollerbird. He gives the concept of 5 chords, as you can see: priority chord, hermeneutic chord, semi-chord, symbolic chord, and cultural chord. Okay, priority chord means an event that requires its sequentiality, that requires another event. ঠিক আছে, for example, in a story, let's see, someone is knocking at the door. Okay, and immediately this would require, who is this person behind the door? Okay, I mean, who is knocking at the door, and what would happen next? Let's say in another story, there is a knife fallen, uh, blood dimmed knife fallen on the floor. Immediately it would lead to the next event, what has happened. Okay, what has happened. So this requires sequentiality. One event requires another event. This is priority code. This leads to question us that what would happen next. Hermeneutic code is what that requires interpretation. Okay, it requires interpretation. For example, in the Da Vinci Code, Professor Langdon solves the anagrams to find the place which he is looking for. So here we find this is these anagrams uh, can be called to the can be can be said can be said that it belong to the hermeneutic code. Also, we can say that in a another in a Feluda movie called Royal Bengal Rahosyo, you'll find that Feluda is solving, solving Bengali riddles to find the mystery. Okay, so to solve the mystery. So here we find that this can be called hermeneutic codes. That means the signifiers, or I should say that the elements that require, explanation, that requires interpretation. Okay. Coming to the next code, that is semicode. Let me tell you, while priority code and hermeneutic code, they are necessary elements for the plot. Semicode, symbolic code, and cultural code, they are very much connotative, means they are subject to the context in which they are written. For example, semicode can be very much stereotypical. For example, I want to refer to the previous pictures, from previous images from the PK film. Let's say we find that a woman wearing a white sari is representative of uh, widow women. Okay, that means all the widows wear uh, white sari. No, it is not. Someone who is widow may not be wearing white sari. So this semi code is stereotypical. Okay, it is very much referential to the context. Next, symbolic code. Symbolic code, as I told you, that symbolic relationship between two objects are is very much arbitrary. There is no inherent connection between them. For instance, in the White Tiger, this very title, White Tiger, has been used as a symbol for Balram. Balram, and all there is another symbol, that is Rooster Coop. Rooster Coop is used as a symbol for poverty. So Balram as a unique compared to a white tiger, a rare animal, is able to cross the borders of poverty, cross the boundaries of poverty. So here you find that Rooster Coop and uh, you know the white tiger are being used as symbols. Next we can come. Let's come to the cultural code. Cultural code, is can be very contextual. For example, you might be seeing the symbol of, in the case of India, you might have seen the symbol two, round shaped spectacles, and these two round shaped spectacles, are symbols of Gandhi's, of Gandhi, right? Gandhi used to wear these round shaped spectacles. So you can see that this is very much contextual. Someone who is not aware of Gandhi, someone who is outside from India, who is outside of India, who is not aware of Gandhi, may not be able to understand the underlying meaning behind this symbol of spectacles. Okay, so this is something that we need to know uh, about Saint-Jean. Let's go to the concluding part. Now, structuralism, like any other theory, has many limitations. Okay, these limitations are addressed by post-structuralism. So post-structuralism was at the same time inspired by structuralism, and it also criticized structuralism. It was, I would say, it was a continuation of structuralism, and at the same time a deviation from structuralism. So, this is the limitations of structuralism. are identified by post-structuralists, and you find that for example, where we find that in the case of structuralism, as pointed out by many post-structuralists, that there is the tendency of keeping the hierarchy intact. Post-structuralists argue that they are every structure has a hierarchy. Every structure is hierarchical, and it has a center. The closer you are to the center, the more privileged you are. The more distant you are from the center, the less privileged or the more marginalized you are. So this is why post-structuralists try to uh, decenter the center, deconstruct the structure. Okay, so that's why they try to give new interpretations of the structure. So this is what post-structuralism does. However, uh, you know, despite its limitations, structuralism can be said to have inaugurated a new method of thinking, new modes of thinking. It inspired so many movements, and its relevance, it is still inspiring so many other, theories uh, to interpret cultural and literary and cultural texts. Okay, that's the end of the video. I hope I have been able to point out certain important aspects of structuralism. We are going to meet in another, we're going to meet again uh, to discuss post-structuralism and all other literary theory. So thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed, and let's conclude, and let's okay, so thank you, dhanyabad, bye bye, we'll see you again.